There's going to be a second part, Herman, and it was not 1995, but it was 1988. In 1988, Joy gave a course, a seminar at Krotona, and it was called Helena P. Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine 100 Years Later. Correct?
Yep.
I have to check with him, it's correct, right? Now, what you need to know is that the folks of Herman have produced a wonderful USB stick here with a complete program on it. It is a historical document. I've written it down. You will have 7 hours of seminar, and that's really something. They made a compilation of 10 videos, right? Yep. And each one is about 40 minutes. So this is really a very special opportunity for you to purchase this. Of course, we go back a little bit in time. Joy looks a little younger, but it is still the same Joy. And we are going to look at the last part of it. It's going to be part 1. It's not going to be so long. It's about 35 to 40 minutes. And it's called The Ethics of the Secret Doctrine. So before we put it on, Herman, is there anything you would like to add in English?
Thank you. Yes, there is a little thing. I was asking Joyce if you need a little bit additional from your secret doctrine study. Which part should we take? So she said, then you should take part what Jan just announced, the ethical side of it. What I like to say as a very general thing, I think you have seen it already a couple of times, but for me on the right side, you will see a piece of our book table is set up special for the secret doctrine. So you will find the USB stick over there, you will find some other books, but you will also find some yellow booklets. And the booklets are very special, because that is from the Santa Barbara people, and they did already a couple of years ago, I think, I don't want to say many years ago, but I think quite some time ago, they were taking all the subjects from the secret doctrine and put the subjects together. So if you want to be focused on a certain subject, I think it were 18 booklets. Yeah, 18 booklets. So, and that makes the study of the secret doctrine much easier to do to you. So you will find a couple of additional things to help you. Also the commentaries of HPB you will find over there. So that is, I think it is a one-off situation for many years. So please have a look. The Santa Barbara people, that booklets we have just to order, but it is no problem. If you make the order on the book table, we will take care of that, and we will send them to you. So all additional means to understand the secret doctrine much better.
Don't forget, this is a gem. And we do it in English, 23 euros. You have a wonderful seminar there. Herman was just referring to the book table. I think there are some audio newsletters there too. Interesting stuff. If you see one, take it with you. They are there for free. So let's do it, Erwin.
Opportunity for really exploring all that is in the secret doctrine, and particularly for exploring some of the ideas that are there, which certainly are being increasingly validated today in terms of contemporary thought, particularly science. I had hoped that we would have more of an opportunity for that. But I think when one is familiar with some of the principal ideas of the secret doctrine, some of the basic concepts that are presented to us, then indeed one begins to see the correlations with contemporary thought. One begins to see how much contemporary thought has moved in this direction. And that, of course, is, to me at least, extremely exciting. And when one reads some of the books that are being published today in the field of science, for example, religious studies also, philosophy, one begins to see the extent to which many of these ideas have been and are being taken up, explored, and really examined much more thoroughly. So just to recapitulate a bit, our first session together, we talked about the modes of thought to which HPB refers, and that we do have to examine how we think. We are so accustomed to our own manner of thinking that we perhaps are not aware that there are other modes of thought. We just are not familiar. It's the mode of thought that we know, because obviously that's the way we think. And we may think everybody thinks the same way. One only has to travel around the world, particularly to cultures which are very different from our own, such as in Asia, to travel in India, for example, or in any of the Asian countries, to travel in Japan, any of the Asian countries, to realize that there are different modes of thinking, and we're not used to them. And if we think everybody thinks as we do, you soon discover that this is indeed not true, that people do think in different ways. So we talked about that, and the mode of thought that is necessary for really understanding the secret doctrine. It's another attitude, and I think that these volumes, by the very way in which they're presented, the very mode of writing, which is different from reading an ordinary textbook, the very mode of writing gives us access to and stimulates in us a different mode of thought. So that we talked about to some extent. Then we looked at some of the sources of the secret doctrine. And I had suggested that we could look at some contemporary theories, not simply the work that has been done in the discovery of certain Tibetan manuscripts, which certainly identify the source of these works, but also to recognize that it really doesn't matter what may have been the source of the work on which H.P. Blavatsky based her commentaries. It's as though she chose a rather obscure work which again excited a different mode of thought. Certainly it was a work not at all known in the last century when she wrote and when she introduced it to the world, the stanzas of Dhyan. This must have been a bombshell to academic scholars. Where did she come upon this? What is it? And so on. And it was merely, if I may put it this way, merely a device on which she hung the exposition of these fundamental principles. It was, again, to stimulate, I think, a mode of thought. Today, there is probably more evidence of the existence of many, many manuscripts of which we know very little. A very different attitude than that in the 19th century, when many scholars felt that anything worth discovering had already been discovered, and therefore nothing new could really, if it weren't known by an Oxford graduate, for example, it wasn't worth knowing, and therefore probably didn't exist and was somebody's fancy. But a very different attitude today. We know that there is a continual discovery Remember, this was long before the Dead Sea Scrolls, the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library, even of the Gnostic texts of Western civilization, let alone long before the uncovering of many of the Tibetan texts which have now are coming into the West and are being translated. And then we talked about really what is the basis of Volume 1, cosmogenesis, the whole underlying cosmogonic process as presented in the Secret Doctrine through these amazing stanzas of Volume 1, and suggested that there is a kind of progressive development in the cosmogonic process, which is repeated in the process of anthropogenesis. And we looked at that in terms of the great archetypal motifs found in all creation myths. Mythology is coming to be recognized as a legitimate field of study once again. In the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century and well into the 20th century, myth was thought to be simply fancy and could be safely left for children. Now it is recognized as a legitimate area of investigation, that it has meaning in terms of the development of consciousness, the psychic growth of the soul, the growth of the psyche or soul. And then yesterday we looked very quickly at Volume 2, nothing like a quick survey of all that is there in anthropogenesis in terms of the stages of development. And recognize that if we really are to understand what we're all about, our place in the universe, we need to know something of our own origins. What we believe about ourselves and our origins has a great deal to do with what we believe about our destiny and our future. What we believe about what is our relationship with the planet on which we live has a great deal to do with how we're going to treat this planet. And we're more alert to that today than we certainly were 100 years ago when the Secret Doctrine was published. So we looked at those stages in terms of the awakening of the principles which constitute man and the triple evolutionary scheme to which HPB refers. So today I thought we should look really at what I call the ethics of the Secret Doctrine, because I think the ultimate lesson of HPB's work lies in an understanding of the ethical implications of the principles. Sometimes individuals say, well, it's too deep a study. I really am not interested in the origins of the universe. I'm not interested in knowing about Fohat and Akasha and Mula Prakriti and all these strange terms to the Western ear. Terms that really, this has nothing to do with how I go shopping every day. It has nothing to do with how I'm going to treat my neighbor. It has nothing to do with cooking dinner tonight. It has nothing to do with driving a car and getting on in the world. I suggest that it does, that it has a very great deal to do, even with how one cooks dinner and how one drives a car, how one treats the earth, how one treats one's neighbor. There are ethical implications, and we all of us moved from a background of a belief system, if you like. We move from what we believe about ourselves and about others. This is how we act. We all have a metaphysics, whether we know it or not. We may not call it that, but we all have a metaphysical position. And we all have certain ideas about purpose and meaning in existence. So I suggest that, indeed, these principles are extremely practical and have a great bearing on our lives. As the pivotal doctrine, as I've pointed out again and again, referred to throughout this week, HPB is very clear at the very outset in her program that there is a pivotal doctrine. Now that must mean the central doctrine. Everything else revolves around, and that's what a pivot is. Everything else revolves around it, is that we are self-responsible, that we can't put it off onto someone else for our actions, our thoughts, our feelings, and that the outcome of the entire cosmogonic process lies within each one of us. We are responsible. So this morning I want to talk about what I call being and responsibility, as is put on the program that you were given at the outset of this series. And to do that, I thought we'd start with these 2 pages that I've given you this morning, important principles. I started this with a little paragraph from the introduction to Aldous Huxley's book, The Perennial Philosophy. You'll remember on the first morning I listed a whole number of synonyms, thank you, synonyms for the secret doctrine. The secret doctrine, as it is the name of, not only the name of these volumes, but the secret doctrine is also, without being italicized or capitalized, is the name for that teaching doctrine. It is a teaching. It is a teaching. There is a doctrine that has all, and why is it called secret when it's published here in 2 volumes? Is this all there is to it? Well, it's secret until we use it. It's secret until we really explore it, until we make it our own. And there are other names for this. The esoteric philosophy, the esoteric tradition. And one of the names you remember that I put up was the term that Aldous Huxley used, the perennial philosophy, or philosophia perennis. He gives it in the Latin form. And you'll notice that he makes it include 3 things. The metaphysic that recognizes a divine reality substantial to the world of things and lives and minds. First of all, therefore, a metaphysic that recognizes the first fundamental proposition of the secret doctrine, a divine reality, which underlies substantial to the world of things and lives and minds. The psychology that finds in the soul something similar to or even identical with. Now, I've quoted Huxley, but from the theosophical point of view, we would simply cross out something similar to, or similar to. We would say that finds in the soul something identical with. So you can cross that out, but I couldn't do it to Huxley. I had to put it in there. But the theosophical position is that it is identical with divine reality. And then the ethic that places man's final end in the knowledge of the immanent and transcendent ground of all being. If you like, we can put this in this manner. I like blue. We'll continue to use blue. So it is a metaphysic it is a psychology, and it is an ethic. And we'll try to explore something of that. The metaphysic is then an ultimate reality. Which HPB says may be called be-ness, the first fundamental proposition. And that is there in the first of the quotations which I've given you from Volume 1, page 120, a marvelous statement, and indeed she says this is the one fundamental law in the whole tradition, the radical unity of the ultimate essence of each constituent part of compounds in nature. Incidentally, when the term radical is used, this does not have to do with radicalism in any political sense, but in the true meaning of the word radical, which is the root. Radical means root, you see. We have used it in the political sense of far left or far right, and we say these are the radicals of our day. But here the term radical unity is used in its original meaning as the root unity, the fundamental unity, that unity which is truly radical because it is the ground of our being. The radical unity of the ultimate essence of each constituent part of compounds in nature, from star to mineral atom, from the highest Dianchohan to the smallest infusorium, in the fullest acceptation of the term, and whether applied to the spiritual, intellectual, or physical worlds. Now, that should remind you of something. Spiritual, intellectual, and physical. What does that remind you of?
Yesterday's classification.
Yesterday's classification of the triple evolutionary scheme, doesn't it? So at every level, this is the triple evolutionary scheme, which for our system, you remember, she said, is interwoven and interblended. So that we sort of progress at all levels at once. There is an interaction among all these levels. This unity is the one fundamental law in occult science. We'll come back to some of these. So the metaphysic is an ultimate reality, a unity, which is beingness, she says, an ultimate beingness, which pervades the universe. In psychology, then, this is what then is an identity of each with all, but therefore implies a becoming, because it is a matter of consciousness. The identity is there, the identity of each soul with the universal oversoul, which is the third fundamental proposition, but it has to be in terms of becoming, doesn't it? That is, we have to grow into the consciousness of this unity. The unity is there, but do we know it? And you see, we may say, well, it's there, yes, I agree, everything is one, but why do we act as though it were not? You see. And so there has to be a becoming. The ethic, then, is that self-responsibility. Hope I spelled that right? Yes. The self, that we are responsible, but we are self-responsible. And that leads then, I suggest, to a being. Being in the true sense that we are knowing we are one. This becoming leads to that kind of being which has its own individual quality. I think one of the great paradoxes, perhaps, which it's difficult to talk about in one sense, but is a paradox, is that one is both one with all, and yet uniquely individual. Uniquely individual. It's not a loss of individuality, but a heightening of individuality in a true awareness.
Heightened and expanded.
Heightened and expanded, yes. Heightened and expanded. This is perhaps the paradox, because the self-realized individual, the Buddha, for example, or any of the great world teachers, Jesus, Gautama, Zoroaster, Krishna, any of the great world teachers, is an individual, fully individual, a knower, a genuine knower. You remember we used that term, it's one of the synonyms, the knower, the Gnostic, the Jnana Yogi is the knower. The true knower is individual. individual, but knows that he is one with all. But there is a great beauty in the individual, isn't there? So I call it being, if you like. So all of these statements, which we might look at to some extent, I think help us to see what is this progression. And we begin to, you can even begin to take under the metaphysic then the principles that are given. See how they work out in terms of the psychology, your growth, and then what is the action that follows from them? What is that self-responsibility that follows from them? And I thought that Aldous Huxley's statement, therefore, gave us a wonderful little pattern that we can use, and that's why I started with it. This, of course, then, helps us to understand, if we can put it this way, something that I said earlier in this particular series. If you look at item 6, which is at the bottom of page 2 and goes on to page 3, that there is that ultimate, page 2 is on the back, you'll see it, page 1, that there are two ones. Now you'll remember that we have discussed this in terms of cosmogony, in terms of the creation myths, that in occult metaphysics there are, properly speaking, two ones. The one on the unreachable plane of absoluteness and infinity, on which no speculation is possible, and the second one on the plane of emanation. Now you remember we came to this mirror reflection sort of principle, the reflection being emanation. The former can neither emanate nor be divided, as it is eternal, absolute, and immutable. The second being, so to speak, the reflection of the first one, for it is the Logos, or Ishvara, in the universe of illusion, can do all this. HBB had to use clumsy terms because there were no other terms for it. Two ones. How can there be two ones? This, of course, is why I frequently refer to the whole metaphysic of the secret doctrine as not monistic, but non-dualistic, which is a better way, perhaps, of saying it, because monism implies this second one, as she calls it, you see. The moment you have one, you are implying that there is a division possible. But when there is non-dual, there is no division. And this, of course, is the literal meaning of advaiti, non-vaiti, two, dva, two. So non-dual, not two. And again, how do we come to the realization of this? How do we move to an understanding of it?
We have to realize there is polarity.
There, now we begin to see, yes, and this is, of course, very true. We begin to recognize there is not duality, but polarity. And this makes it a very different kind of vision, that it's not dual, it's non-dual, but within that emanation, that reflection that arises, there is polarity. For example, I think perhaps one of the easiest examples is the continuum of temperature. Temperature is one, as it were, or non-dual. Temperature itself is non-dual. But it has polarities, which we call hot and cold. And it differs for every individual, you see. These are not two separate opposites, but they are part of a continuum. We get this in the electric bar, the electric magnet. You see, however thinly you slice the electric bar, you still have a polarity of positive and negative.
Nothing can happen until there's polarity.
And nothing can happen until there is that kind of polarity, you see. So we're going to, I think an interesting way of looking at it is that we have two eyes. But we do not see two separate things with our two eyes. You may, if you go to the oculist or optometrist, and you cover one eye and then you cover the other and so on. But we use the two eyes together, and we have a depth vision, a 3D dimensional depth dimension in seeing with the two eyes. But the two eyes act in unison then. So there's a polarization, not an opposition, not two separate things, but rather always this underlying unity. Now, as we come to, in this becoming process of knowing this, of realizing this, what does this mean in terms of the ethic that arises from it? In terms of being responsible, what does this mean? I think we begin to see then that there are not separate things, there is relationship. Throughout the entire universe, there is relationship. And what is that relationship then? I am responsible for the relationship. Rather than saying, well, you're at fault. You say, you're out there, you did this to me, you hurt me, you did this, you made it difficult, you put a stone in the road and I fell over it and so on, all of this. That there is now a polarity and there is a relationship. And what is that relationship? We begin to have another point of view. And I think this comes, therefore, to an ethic, a way of living, a way of acting. We can say, my thoughts are very private. Don't intrude in my thought. Get out of my dreams, if you were, as it were. My thought is my own. But can there be any thought that is separate, that is not part of the whole? Any feeling, any emotion that is not part of this continuum then? It's a polarization rather than an opposition. There are not then separate things, but only the relationship that I then am responsible for. So it gives us a different meaning. Well, let's look at some of the others as time permits. One of my favorites is number 2. This is from the papers that were HPB's papers to her esoteric students, and therefore is found in the 5th volume of the Adyar edition. I'm sorry I didn't put down, I should have, well, I can give you, yes. In volume 12 of the collected writings, it's on page 624. If you don't have the Adyar edition and you want to know the reference, in volume 12 of the collected writings of HPB, it's on page 624. It happens to be one of my favorites, and it points again to this necessity to come back to the metaphysic, because our action and our growth in consciousness, that is our psychology, are dependent upon our metaphysical position. It's a wonderful statement. To understand this abstruse metaphysical doctrine fully and correctly, and of course this abstruse metaphysical doctrine is the secret doctrine, the esoteric philosophy, the occult tradition, the perennial philosophy, the forgotten truth of Houston Smith, all of those terms that we had on the board earlier. To understand it fully and correctly, one has to be thoroughly impressed with an idea, and then I love this phrase, which I have in vain endeavored to impart to Theosophists at large. One feels, this of course was written near the end of her life. This was after the formation of her esoteric group, so it had to be after 1888, because this is not only the centenary this year of the publication of the secret doctrine, it's the centenary of the establishment of the esoteric school, which she established in 1888. And here she says she's endeavored in vain to impart to Theosophists this idea, namely, the great axiomatic truth that the only eternal and living reality is that which the Hindus call Paramatman and Parabrahman. Now, these two in the Vedantic tradition are one. Para-Atman and Para-Brahman are one. There is an utter identity between that universal principle of spirit, if you like, Atman, and that universal creative principle, which is Para-Brahman. They are one. They are not separate. And this, of course, is very clear in the Advaita Vedanta philosophy of Shankaracharya and his successors. This is the fundamental principle, the ultimate reality. This is the one ever-existing root essence. That's the radical unity she's spoken of in Volume 1, which I have there as number 1. The ever-existing root essence, immutable and unknowable to our physical senses, but manifest and clearly perceptible to our spiritual natures. Once imbued with that basic idea, incidentally, you remember on the first morning together I suggested that this is indeed unknowable, but not non-experienceable. That is, it is experienceable in terms of the growth of consciousness. In terms of consciousness, therefore perceptible to our spiritual natures, unknowable to our physical senses. And this, remember, was written at a time when the science of her day said that if it was not known by the physical senses, it was just not possible to approach it, unknowable. But she says clearly perceptible, which is in a sense the experience indeed of illumination of the Buddha, if you like. Once imbued with that basic idea and the further conception that if it, that is that ultimate reality, is omnipresent, universal and eternal, like abstract space itself, and indeed identified with abstract space, we must have emanated from it, and we must someday return to it. Now know that, and all the rest becomes easy. So if you really know that, isn't that a marvelous statement? All the rest becomes easy. Then everything else, all the other principles, all the other ideas, all the other concepts are very easy. That's all we really need to know. But do we know it? Do we really know it? Are we imbued with this basic idea? Do we act in ways that contradict? We may know it intellectually, and that's not knowing. We may, hold it as it's a nice, grand, lofty thought. It's like saying, I feel very brotherly when I'm alone. Nobody's disturbing me in my meditation at 5 a.m. in the morning. Nobody is around. And I am most peaceful. I am most brotherly. I am aware of the unity of all life because I am alone. But let the phone ring, let anybody enter my room, or when I go out and meet people on the street, then it's quite a different matter. Brotherhood then sort of disappears for the moment.
That like the saying, I love humanity as people I can't
Yes, I love you. Yes, I love humanity, but it's people I can't stand. But here she says, once imbued with that, you see, really, one's whole structure, one's whole being is permeated with this. And the further conception that not only have we come from it, that is, we are the reflection of that. And we must someday return to it. not by the loss of personhood, perhaps by the loss of personality, but not by the loss of personhood, of individuality, of the uniqueness, return to it in a fully self-conscious manner. This is the process of becoming by means of our self-responsibility. Then everything else becomes easy. It's a wonderful statement, isn't it? You see. But we really do not always recognize it. And so perhaps we have time just to consider the third statement, which again emphasizes this, but recognizes the position that we hold in regard to it. All that which is emanates from the Absolute, which from this qualification alone stands as the one and only reality. Hence, everything extraneous to this Absolute, the generative and causative element, the whole process then of becoming, must be an illusion, but only from the purely metaphysical point of view. Now that doesn't mean it's a delusion, but only that it is an appearance. This is what illusion is, you see. It's the magic play. And that's why very frequently the creative principle, the Shakti, or feminine aspect of the creative principle is referred to as Maya. It is a magical show, you see. It's illusion in the sense that it really is a magical appearance. And this is what is cosmos. You remember I spoke about this distinction between chaos, which is this primordial, abstract space in which there appears, as if by magic, and it is a magical show, all the multiplicity of existence, which is an appearance, which is the cosmos. It's the cosmetic, if you like, on the face of chaos, which is the appearance. And that's our only way of coming at it, is to deal with the cosmetic, so to speak. Because the word cosmetic is the same as the word cosmos. It comes from it. But only from the purely metaphysical view. And so she uses a marvelous analogy here. A man who regards himself as mentally sane and is so regarded by his neighbors calls the visions of an insane brother whose hallucinations make the victim either happy or supremely wretched, whichever it may be. He calls those visions illusions and fancies likewise. But where is that madman for whom the hideous shadows in his deranged mind, his illusions, are not for the time being as actual and as real as the things which his physician, that should be his physician, I'm sorry, or keeper may see. Everything is relative in this universe. Again, we come to this relational. But the experience on any plane is an actuality for the percipient being whose consciousness is on that plane. Though the said experience regarded from the purely metaphysical standpoint may be conceived to have no objective reality. So it is, the process of becoming is important. Never underestimate the necessity for physical incarnation, for it is here where we achieve every step in the progress. From a purely metaphysical point of view, this is an appearance, and it is a temporary appearance, but it gives us the experience that leads to the becoming, the growth of consciousness. And only by this can there be this growth in consciousness. A marvelous statement. So don't dismiss, you say, oh, well, it's merely illusion. That's not the point. The point is that it is not, that one must see behind the appearance to the reality and be aware, therefore, that it is in the relationship that consciousness is awakened, and therefore it has meaning in the process of becoming towards being. Well, let us stop at this point.
Nice music and a wonderful historical document. Helena P. Blavatsky, The Secret Doctrine, 100 years later. And there was no PowerPoint, and there was no laptop. And did you see that simple wooden chair she was sitting on? And she started, and she didn't stop. She coughed 3 times. Joy Mills quoted as saying, the odd thing with Theosophists is really that if they were about to enter nirvana, they would prefer to only talk about it. Anyway, this unique document is available here, and I can really recommend it. You can study it, you can use parts of it in your own study groups. And it is not a matter of copying what Joy said, it is using what she gave to us. She's still with us, and we hope, of course, for a very long time. But this document is so special and so wonderful, so I could really recommend you purchase it and use it in your own group, in your own environment. Please try to be here tomorrow morning a little bit before 9, because we're going to have a group meditation. See you all tomorrow, because we have wonderful contributions by Joop Smits, Sabine van Osta, and Carolyn Dorrance. And of course, everything will be beautifully moderated by Marijn. See you all tomorrow, and slaap lekker.